Hello, everyone, and welcome to my talk, which is all about harnessing behavioral-driven development techniques like example mapping for effective API delivery and documentation. So my name is Frank Kilcommins. I'm a principal API Technical Evangelist at SmartBear. I'm a developer and software architect, and I have a great passion for APIs and the encompassing developer experience. I also do quite a lot of work with the Open API initiative, specifically on the new workflow specification. And what I'm going to talk to you about for the next 20 minutes or so is taking a look at why APIs fail and the big P problem, so the people problem, and then how we can leverage behavioral-driven development, combine it with powerful API specifications to tackle some of those people challenges, leading us to be able to deliver better APIs. Hopefully, you'll learn some takeaways that you can take with you back to your teams and start applying this throughout your practices. So, of course, APIs give us a brilliant way to be able to be relevant in any industry, regardless of what company we are in. And we really need to focus on how data is entering our company, exiting our company, even being exchanged by the capabilities or the domains therein. And for that to work well, non-technical stakeholders need to be aware of what problems are being solved by the capabilities that we expose in the digital form, why APIs are being chosen as the solution to solve those problems, and why providing direct access to those capabilities through APIs rather than maybe through your proprietary mobile apps or web portals leave you better able to participate in the digital economy. You also need to be aware of how you can, go to market with an API, and are there any, monetization opportunities that you're potentially leaving on the table. So having that business grasp and understanding the business relevance of APIs is critically important. Otherwise, they will inevitably fall into the technical project domain. And we do a very, very good job as technologists with regards to spending all of the budget on offer. Now, even when you do have a good idea with regards to what you need to do to be able to deliver good APIs, we're still seeing alignment gaps that are out there. And this is coming from our State of Software Quality for API for this year from SmartBear. And we're still seeing that 48% of respondents are not confident that their APIs are well documented and being able to explain the value on offer. We're also seeing that approximately 43% are unsure that their processes will lead to delivering the developer experience that they themselves would expect from one of their API providers. And with all of these gaps and these communication breakdowns, what we're seeing is that inevitably leads to poor APIs manifesting themselves, leaving both the providers, but more importantly, the consumers, a little bit dazed and confused. And this is really where I see an opportunity for BDD to play a role within the modern API delivery lifecycle, because of course, an API is an interface to a capability. And that interface is the primary representation to the consumer as to the behavior that's on offer. And for me, that segues and dovetails very, very nicely into the BDD way of thinking. But what we need to do is to be able to get to a place where we can benefit from having living documents conforming to hopefully API specifications. But how can we do that effectively? Well, the first thing that we need to do is be able to understand what problem are we trying to solve. So how are we capturing API requirements across our API landscape today? Are we writing down all of the business rules in a business rule document? Are we using some of our favorite tools like Jira or Azure DevOps to write all of the acceptance criteria in? Maybe we're leaving it to the QAs to codify all of those business rules into test plans, which of course, we're definitely going to hand those over to our consumers. Or maybe we're a little bit, more startup, a little bit more agile. We're just scribbling our requirements onto napkins, handing them to the developers, and hoping that they'll annotate the code so that we'll have some form of documentation being output to explain the behavior of the API or the system. And if we look at what BDD is and how they approach this type of problem, this is the BDD workflow that's been popularized by the Cucumber team, so the likes of Seb Rose and Aslak Helisoy. And it's really split into 3 different phases. The first phase is discovery, and that's where we all come to a collaborative understanding as to what problem we're trying to solve and how we're going to solve it. We then formulate that common understanding, and this is the formulation phase. And that's done in a pseudo-human readable format, traditionally in BDD, using something like Gherkin. And then we leverage tools that can understand that machine-readable feature document. And that gives us an ability to automate and assert against the software, getting us to a place where we can actually realize a return on investment. And that's by having functional software that conforms to all of the requirements that we set out. But in the world of APIs, is there something else that we can do without having to add yet another additive activity for the teams to work on? And I think we already have something out there that can support us, and they are API specifications. Now, of course, API specifications do a lot more than just document what an API looks like. A consumer can really understand and interact with a remote service with minimal implementation logic. The same is true on the provider side. It gives us something tangible, something that we can talk to be able to more effectively communicate on the value proposition offered by any API. And of course, specifications play a very strong role in the technical teams to allow us to deliver good APIs by offering us the means to assert that we're delivering consistent contracts. And this works across the different styles of APIs that are out there, be it Open API for REST, Protobuf for gRPC, GraphQL schema for GraphQL type APIs, Async API for event-driven APIs. So it all allows the teams to be able to define the contract and design that upfront and set clear expectations as to how APIs are expected to behave for consumers. We then can really benefit from the rich tooling that's been built up around these specifications and allow specifications to drive the API lifecycle. So once we understand what we're going to do, we codify that into a design artifact like an Open API description. We then can very, very easily spin up a mock of the API. We can get a kickstart on the implementation by generating some boilerplate code. We can allow the testing team to work independently and in parallel to the development team and automatically start creating the functional security load and compliance tests. We can virtualize that API for external consumers. And of course, from a documentation perspective, we can trust in the interoperability between the different gateways and developer portals around these specifications to allow us to invest time into making sure that the documentation really does tell the story of the API. Now, I am a specifications advocate, but if we look back at one of the grandees from systems methodologies called Milt Bryce, the way he phrases it is that good specifications will always improve programmer productivity far better than any programming tool or technique. And this is because of the attributes that they emit. So they're very well structured with regards to the principles of information hiding. They offer standardized representations. They're simple and efficient. They're also flexible with regards to requirement changes of the software over time. They're practical, so they're not overly general, nor are they too specific. They're also implementable. Thus, we see the rich ecosystem of toolings being built, and they are verifiable. So they afford the teams that are using them the ability to leverage the tools to verify that the software that they're delivering actually does what they expect it to do. So if we remember back to the BDD workflow, what I would propose, instead of using something yet new to the API teams like Gherkin and like Cucumber, we can already start taking advantage of API specifications. So assuming that we're trying to build a RESTful API, we can leverage Open API for the formulation phase, but also from the automation phase, because remember, the rich ecosystem of tooling allow us to automate many of the steps along the way. So this will allow us to more quickly discover what we're trying to build, come to that common understanding, formulate it into an artifact that will serve well for the provider team. But remember, that artifact is also going to be exchanged and shared with consumers. So what we want to do is to be able to get to the place where we can uncover what we need and discover what we need as quickly as possible. So for the remainder of this session, we're going to focus on the discovery phase of BDD and how that can be applied for the modern API team. And for discovery, and deliberate discovery is a term that was popularized and created by Dan North, who's one of the creators of BDD. And we're going to use a technique called example mapping, which was created by Matt Wynn. And I had the pleasure of working with Matt for a period of time. But it's all really about, having real-time human conversations so that we can front load as much insight as possible, leading us to be a more predictable and better functioning team. So we can agree on the scope of what we're going to do. We can identify any uncertainty. We can agree on, is this thing ready to actually take into the next phase of delivery? And we do so by identifying concrete examples. And if you think of the old agile adage of unknown unknowns, it's really around having these structured collaborative conversations between the different disciplines on the team to come to a common understanding so we can find those unknown unknowns. Once we've found them, they become known unknowns. Then they're in our sights. and we can actually get support and answer the questions that remain, so that we can eventually classify them as known knowns, and we can put them on our backlog and make them ready for us to work on. So when it comes to example mapping, what is it? How does it actually work? Well, the only thing you need is to be working in user stories or a similar type of methodology for delivery. And all you need after that are some colored cards. So if you're having an interactive human session co-located, you can actually use physical cards. If you're remote, you can use Miro or Mural or any type of whiteboard tooling like that. And actually Miro has a nice template that supports the example mapping process. So the 4 colored cards that you have are yellow, and they house the user story. So the product owner will generally bring along a user story for discussion, and they'll also have drafted some business rules onto blue cards. We then work collaboratively and have conversations to write down examples so that we can come to a common understanding of the behavior of the rule written on the blue card, and we write these examples on green cards. An example has a specific type of anatomy. So it has a context, an action, and an outcome. And these sessions are meant to be short and sweet. So they work best if they're short and sweet because they're very effective. So what I would say is no more than 30 minutes, and they should happen maybe every other day throughout your sprint cycle. So who should participate in these sessions? And actually, maybe before I move on, if you encounter something that you don't know, or you have an assumption, you will put that on a red card. Now, traditionally within the BDD approaches, these sessions are known as the 3 amigos session. So you'll have a product owner, you'll have a QA or a tester, and you'll have a developer. Now, as you're starting, more people from the team can participate to improve the knowledge and the learning across those teams, and you can make it leaner again over time. In the world of APIs, many organizations are having setups and structures where they have API guilds or Center for Enablement, Centers for Excellence, communities of practice, even their enterprise architecture teams. And what I would say is that if these options are available to you, you should definitely pull in API subject matter experts into these conversations. So if you have floating API designers, make sure that they participate. If you have API architects, make sure that they participate, because it's all about moving from an ivory tower approach to governance and standardization for APIs, shifting left on that as much as possible and really baking it in practical terms for the teams that are actually doing the work. So it's all around, answering the 2 questions. Are we building the right API? So are we getting validation and fast feedback that, yes, if we do this, we will solve the problem? So we're validating that our approach to solving the problem is correct. And then we'll be investing in the tooling built up on top of the API specifications to support the team with verifying that they're doing it in the right way. So are we building the API right? So are we picking the right style? Is it consistent with the other APIs that we have on offer, and so on and so forth? So for the rest of the session, we'll go through a little bit of a practical example as to how this will work. So let's imagine we're all working for a company called Petco, and unfortunately we have a problem. So we're being overwhelmed by the number of pets that are being abandoned at our pet store or in the vicinity of our pet store. So following our own independent research and evaluation, we've decided that we're going to create the ability to search for and adopt pets that we catalog. We're going to offer this service as a new feature into our own proprietary website, but we're going to make it available also as an API to a wider ecosystem of shelters, charities, and pet orphanages. So the product owner says, well, the first user story that we need to accomplish here is search for pets. So we're going to have an example mapping session. The product owner brings the search for pets user story, and they've already written down 2 business rules that need to be delivered to complete this user story. So calling the search pets resource returns all available pets, and pets can be filtered by status, category, location, and breed. So we're going to go through the example mapping process to make sure we all understand and have a common understanding with regards to how these things should be delivered. So everyone learning how the product manager thinks, everyone learning how the developer thinks, everyone learning how the tester, how the API designer, how the architect think. We all come to this common understanding through these concrete examples. So we're going to write it down. And again, remember, an example has a particular anatomy. So it has a context, it has an action and an outcome. So the context and the action are that Jane calls the search pets resource, and the outcome is that all details of available pets are returned. Looks pretty good. Well, actually, the API designer is going to come in and say, well, we probably shouldn't be returning all properties because we have quite a few in the catalog. So we should be creating a new data object for the summary details. And that's what we should be returning as part of this resource. So we've uncovered a new business rule that we need to honor in order to be able to deliver this user story. The API architect then chimes in and says, well, we actually need to support pagination because we don't want to, overstress the servers returning too many resources. What if we actually end up cataloging thousands of these pets? So now the team learns, as part of their practice about an API standard. So that unknown becomes a known for them. The API architect is there. There's no ambiguity as to what needs to be done. So it's now very quickly classified into a known, and it's put on as part of the business rules needed to deliver this particular user story. So now if we're searching for pets, we must support pagination and the pagination parameters to allow a consumer to iterate over the different pages. So we move on to the next business rule, which is pets can be filtered by status, category, location, and breed. And the first example we write down is that Jane searches for adopted status pets. Paged summary of adopted pets are returned. If Jane searches for pets located in Galway, a paged summary of Galway located pets is returned. Jane searches for cats. Well, a paged summary of cats, regardless of their location, status, or breed, are returned. And if Jane searches for boxer breed cats, and here the product owner was assuming it was going to be an error, and that's what they had wrote down first. But actually the architect again comes in and says, no, if we look at the context here, Jane has not done anything wrong. She merely has provided criteria that didn't match against anything that we've cataloged. So therefore we return a successful response because it wasn't an issue on the consumer side. And we will have an empty array of pets being returned because we didn't find any hits in our search. So again, the team has learned about this, and this will be part of their psyche moving forward. So they're going to get better and better at creating these APIs. And we complete this example mapping process, again, all under 30 minutes. And we leave this session. And then the API designer is able to take these concrete examples, understanding what needs to be done to honor these business rules for this particular API endpoint. And they can start on the formulation. And formulation in these terms is all about creating the first pass of the API design. So the designer can pick their API tool of choice. In this case, it's just Swagger Hub. They will come in and they'll start writing and crafting the open API definition, leveraging any templates that they already have. Remember, this is all going to be supported by other automation that's been created by the architects and by the other API teams to enforce any business rules and any linting experiences that are in there. So we've created the get pets. We're seeing that some rules are highlighting up here because, oh, I made a mistake around camel casing, and the designer doesn't have to worry about keeping all of those things in his or her head. So very, very quickly, we've delivered this endpoint. It has all of the query parameters that we need. It has all of the response messages that we've outlined and discovered in the example mapping session. So we then have follow-up sessions for the different user stories, view pet details, add a new pet, adopt a pet, get pet adoptions. So as we're doing these, our repertoire of known knowns around API standards and the governance that we need to apply to build good APIs within Petco is becoming much more familiar with the team. So it's a very practical way to help coach and elevate the ability for teams to deliver consistent APIs across your group. And examples are incredibly powerful for getting all of the different disciplines in the team onto the same way of thinking with regards to what needs to be done to solve the problem and deliver the behavior that the consumer will expect. But are there more that we can do with examples? And yes, there are. Because again, we're using API specifications. Most specifications also support the ability for us to embed examples, again, to improve the understanding of the API consumer. So we've seen how good they are for the provider side, working in examples, being able to understand what behavior we're building. But equally, examples can be good to improve the understanding of API consumers, to understand what an API actually does. And again, this is coming back to us in our state of software quality for API reports, but we're seeing that examples continue to be the best learning resource for API consumers. In fact, they're more than twice as effective as code samples with regards to being able to allow consumers the ability to understand how an API actually functions. So let's take it into looking very, very quickly at formulation for the completed set of user stories that we've done throughout having a few example mapping sessions and a few very, very quick iterations on the API design. So here we have the designer, and we've had the example mapping sessions, 5 of them, about the different user stories. We now have, taking a pass at the API design, we have get pets by ID, post adoptions, patch adoptions, get adoptions. And we're able to take the power of examples for Open API to allow an API to tell its story. And we can actually chain the examples together so that this API design document becomes living. So if I do a get search for the pets, I can get the pet ID for Panther the cat. I then can pass that ID to the get pet details, and I can learn that Panther is a mischievous little kitten. And I'm like, well, I think I might want to adopt that. So I can issue an adoption request for Panther the cat using the same identifier. We see that it's requested. And once all out of band checks are done, I can now complete the adoption for Panther the cat by issuing a patch request for that adoption by ID. And now we see it's approved. So I'm now the proud owner of Panther the cat. Well, not really, but as an API consumer, it was very, very easy for me to understand the story of the API and being able to interact with the different endpoints in the API through the examples that were made available to me. Now, remember, no coding implementation has happened here. This is all powered off the Open API description itself and the fact that we've tooling built up on top of that. And that tooling can allow the API to statically serve back those examples. And we can take it a step further by chaining those examples together to really allow us to tell the API story. So if we look at the overarching process here with regards to what we're doing to build a more effective API team, what we're doing is we're making sure that we have the requirements coming in from the consumers. We're doing these 3 Amigo plus API SME sessions. We're all agreeing on the examples that we're writing down. Are these honoring the business rules that we're trying to deliver? If yes, then we can move into the formulation phase. So we start writing the API design, writing the Open API design. This is being supported by the tooling that we have. So we have the information models, we've all of the styling rules coming in, because remember the rich tooling ecosystem that surrounds Open API and the API standards. We work on putting examples into those. We then validate with the business stakeholders, are these examples representative? If yes, we can auto mock it and we can get sign off and improve design, and we can very, very quickly hand that to the development teams, hand it to the testing teams, hand it to the tech writers, and so on and so forth. So hopefully you see that if we do focus on the consumer and the behavior that they really need, so outside in rather than inside out, we keep people at the center of what we're trying to do with regards to delivering good APIs. We remember the power of human conversations and techniques like example mapping to enable us to come onto the same page with regards to what's being delivered, because good collaboration really allows us to deliver a good developer experience. And remember, your API is your promise to your consumers. And if you leverage examples properly, you can allow your API to tell its own story. Thank you very much.